as we would know, Maven is a very, very simple Java-based build tool that will allow you to run various targets, and it will compile. It will, based upon the goals that you specify, it can compile, it can run some tests, and it can build a WAR file and even deploy it into some other server. For now, what we're going to use Maven is just for building and creating a package out of this particular web application. It contains a bunch of things, and what is important is just the index.jsp. It just contains an HTML file that is there as a part of this web application. So from a perspective of requirements, now since I'm going to connect Jenkins with this particular repository, Git, we already have that set. We only need two other things. One is Maven, because Jenkins will use Maven. So in order to use Maven, Jenkins would have to have a Maven installation that is there on the Jenkins box. And in this case, the Jenkins box is this laptop. And after I have my Maven installed, I also need a Tomcat server. Tomcat is a very, very simple web server that you can freely download. I'll let you know how to quickly download and install the Tomcat. Alright, so download Maven first. There are various ways in which you can kind of download this Maven. There is zip files, binary zip files, and archive files. So what I've done is I've just already downloaded Maven, and if you see, I've unzipped it here. So this is the folder with which I've unzipped my Maven. So as you know, Maven again is a one open source build tool. So you'll have to set in a few configurations and set up the path. So mvn -- version, if I specify this, after I set in my path, Maven should work. And if at all I echo m2 home, which is nothing but the variable, environment variable specific to Maven home, it is already set here. So once you unzip Maven, just set this m2 home variable to the directory where you unzipped your Maven. Also, just set the path to this particular directory /bin, because that is where your Maven executables are all found. Alright, so that's with Maven. And since I've set the path and the environment variable Maven is running perfectly fine on my system, I've just verified it. Okay, next one is a Tomcat server. Download Apache Tomcat server 8.5 is what I have on my system. So I'm just going to show you where to download this from. This is where you download Tomcat server, and I already have the server downloaded. Again, this doesn't need any installation. I just unzip it here, and it kind of has a bin and configuration. I've made some subtle changes in the configuration. First and foremost, Tomcat server also by default runs on port 8080. Since we already have our Jenkins server running on port 8080, we cannot let Tomcat run on the same port. There will be a port clash. So what I've done, I've configured Tomcat to use a different port. So if I go to this configuration file here, there is a server.xml. Let me open this up here. Alright, okay. So this is the port. By default, it will be 8080. I've just modified it to 8081. So I've changed the port on which my Tomcat server would run. Alright, so that's one change. Second change, when Jenkins kind of tries to get into my Tomcat and deploy something for someone, he would need some authentications so that he'll be allowed deployment by Tomcat. So for that, I need to create a user on Tomcat and provide this user credentials to my Jenkins instance. So I would go to Tomcat users.xml file here. I've already created a username called deployer and the password is deployer, and I've added a role called manager-script. Manager-script will allow programmatic access to the Tomcat server. So this is the role that is there. So using these credentials, I will enable or I'll empower Jenkins to get into my Tomcat server and deploy my application. Alright, only these two things that is required. Let me just start my Tomcat server first. So I get into my bin folder, I open a command prompt here, and there's a startup.bat. It's pretty fast, it just takes a few seconds. Yes, there you go. Tomcat server is up and running. Now, this is running on port 8081. So let me just check if that looks good. So localhost 8081. Okay, my Tomcat server is up and running. That sounds good. The user is already configured on this. That's also fine. So what I'll do as a part of my first job, Maven is also installed on my system. So I'm good to use Maven as a part of my Jenkins. So I will put up a simple job now. I will say job mvn web app. I call this freestyle job. That's good. Okay, so this will be a Git repository. What is the URL of my Git repository? Is this guy, HTTPS URL. Okay, that's this URL. I will use the credentials. The old credential that I set up will work well because it's the same Git user that I'm kind of connecting into. All right, so now the change happens here where after I get this, since I said this is a simple Maven repository, I will have some Maven targets to run. So the simple target first is, let me run Maven package. This creates a war file. Okay, so MVN package is the target. Package is the target. So whenever I run this package, it kind of creates it, it builds it, it tests it, and then creates a package. So this is all that is required. Maybe let me try to save this, and let me first run this and see if it connects well, if there's any problem with my war file, or the war file gets created properly. Okay, wonderful. So it built a war file, and if you see, it all shows you what is the location where this war file was generated. So this will be the workspace. If you see this war file was successfully built. Now I need to grab this particular war file, and then I would need to deploy it into Tomcat server. Again, I would need a small plugin to do this because I need to connect Tomcat with my Jenkins server. Let me go ahead and install the plugin for the container deployment. So I will go to Manage Plugins, Available, type in Container. Container. Deploy to container. Okay, so this is the plugin that I would need. I would install it without a restart. Right? Seems to be very fast. Nope, sorry, it's still installing. Okay, it installed the plugin. So if at all you see this, if you go to my workspace, okay, in the target folder, I would see this web application war file that is already built. So I would need to configure this plugin to pull up this war file and deploy it onto the Tomcat server. For deploying onto the Tomcat server, I will use the credentials of the user that I've created. Okay, so let me go to configure this particular project again. And okay, all this is good. So the package is good. I'm going to just create a package. That's all fine. Now add a post build step. So after the war file is built as a part of this package directive, let me use this deployment to container. Now this will show up after you install the plugin. So deploy this one to the container. Now what is that you're supposed to specify? You're supposed to specify what is the location. Okay, so this is a global configuration that is there that will allow you to, from the root folder, it will pick up the war file that is there. So *****.war, that's good for me. Okay, what is the context path? Context path is nothing but just the name of an application that, under which it will get deployed into the Tomcat server. I will just say MavenWebApp. That's the name of my thing. Now I need to specify what kind of a container that I'm talking about. All right, so the deployment would be for this Tomcat 8.5 is what I need. Okay, because the server that we have is a Tomcat 8.5 server that I have. So this would be the URL. So the credentials, yes, I need to add a credential for this particular server. So if you remember, I had created a credential for my web application. So let me just find that. My Tomcat server, yes, configuration of this. Okay, so deployer and deployer. Username is deployer, password is deployer. Okay, so let me use that credential. I would say add a new credential, Jenkins credential. The username is deployer and the password is deployer. So I would use this deployer credentials for that. And what is the URL of my Tomcat instance? So this is the URL of my Tomcat instance. So take the war file that is found in this particular folder, and then context path is MavenWebApp. Use the deployment credentials and get into this localhost, which is there 8081. This is the Tomcat server that is running on my system, and then go ahead and deploy it. Okay, so that is all that is required. So I would say just save this and let me run it now. Okay, it successfully built the war file. It is trying to deploy it, and looks like the deployment went ahead perfectly well. So the context path was MavenWebApp. So if I type in this, if at all I go ahead into my Tomcat server, there would be a web apps folder. You would see the date timestamp. So this is the file that got recently copied, and this is the Explorer version of our application. So the application was built, the source code of this application was pulled from the GitHub server. It was built locally on the Jenkins instance, and then it was pushed into a Tomcat server which is running on a different port, which is 808.1. Now for this demo, I'm running everything locally on my system, but assuming that this particular Tomcat instance was running on some other server with some other different IP address, all that you got to go and change is the URL of the server. So this would be the server in case you already have that, if you have a Tomcat server which is running on some other machine, that's all fine. With a different IP, that's all good enough. The whole bundle or the war file that was built as a part of this Jenkins job gets transferred onto the other server and gets deployed. That's the beauty of Jenkins and automatic deployments, or other deployments using Jenkins and Maven.